Example of how callously we regard our own population. Everybody's aware of the D-Day, Normandy invasion of Europe by the Allied forces, the combined forces. But prior to D-Day, they ran a simulation of that with the armed forces along the eastern coast of England. And you can find it documented as well, because that's where I found it and sat there astonished. And they ran this simulation with live ammunition and killed a number of Allied soldiers, in which then they totaled that tally on and tacked it on to the later invasion, so there was no question about how many casualties that will run during the simulation. But you can look that up and see that for yourself. We, like I said, with the nuclear tests going around ground zero in White Sands, we have no compunction about doing terrible things to our own people. And we have, you know, this is not just a new thing. We've done that for thousands of years. And so I know that might be difficult because we are so programmed by science fiction, the media, Spielberg movies or whatever. You can count them, you know, Saucers on the Attack, Armageddon, Men in Black, Alien, the Terminator, Predator. I mean, they come out by the dozens. And remember, what you may not know, if you look at the book Hollywood versus the Flying Saucer and Silver Screen Saucer, which I mentioned in both the books as well, that there is a military clearinghouse across the street from the major studios upon which all science fiction scripts must pass review and observation to be approved by them before they can go on to filming. Right? So there is a very definite manipulation of information that that is going on. That people, well, you know, you can't blame people either, because we're busy in our lives and we have things to do. But we should always maintain a curiosity factor, and we should always maintain interest in anything and everything. These are the things that give us a youthful thought, a continuation of brain function, and things like this. This helps us as a human being altogether. We must never lose our curiosity and our interest factor, no matter what age we are. And so you can understand how people find things difficult, because we have purposely created a system of economic slavery. It is the greatest slavery on the face of the planet. And what do I mean by that? We are convinced that we must have the latest and greatest of everything. Every 6 months, you better run your behind down to Apple and get the new iPhone that costs $1,000. If your neighbor gets a $100,000 car, by God, you better have one too, because then you're looked down at in the neighborhood of look what you can't afford. You better upgrade your home. You better upgrade your home so that your family is happy in the home, but you're living in the home and paying for it, not them. So who cares what they think, right? And so we perpetuate a economic slavery by feeding us to our weaknesses. And so we, husband and wife, now work harder and harder. Nobody's there for the children. We send them to school because in reality, we consider school not an education but babysitters, right? And so we have been used by the willingness of our own weaknesses. And so how can you have clear thought if you've got both of you working 12 hours a day, you hardly see each other, you come home, feed the kids, fall face down in bed, go out and do it again. But then you have to say no. You don't need the $100,000 car. You can buy a different car that doesn't cost so much and puts you in debt for so difficult a period of time. How much crap do we buy that we don't need? And then we go in there and say, oh, well, It's time to go visit Goodwill and take all this old stuff out. And basically it's a lot of stuff that either doesn't fit or wouldn't fit or what have you. And you think of the cost that we spent on this whole collection of stuff. I mean, we could have taken a nice vacation somewhere, what I personally am much more inclined to do than waste it on that kind of stuff. But
well, that's our politicians.
Well,
they
but
can't
it's
say
our
no to anything.
It's our willingness to accept it, because ultimately, who controls the yes and the no? We do. I can say no. Somebody says to me, Glenn, I want you to kill this guy in the back. Well, I say no. I don't say how much. And I've known him since we played tennis together in high school, right? So ultimately, the power lies within us. While yes, there is manipulation, while yes, there is corruption, unfortunately,
you see it in every commercial. You see
it, but unfortunately, we're willing to accept it. When you ask people, is your government corrupt? Oh, hell yes. Like Truman said, beware of the politician who comes in poor and goes out rich. The abuse of power. I think we see some of that now. So, what happens is, if you know yourself, you don't accept that. You live here or in this proximity and you enjoy this environment. And if I say to you, you have a choice of being here or go living in downtown Manhattan, which I personally don't like. All the people crammed together like rats, constant noise, constant trash, constant smell.
We're here for a reason. We don't want downtown.
That's right. So we're here for a reason. You made a choice. And ultimately, we must learn to choose for betterment versus the influence of whatever. Because what these fellows do in Washington, remember, they are just the top of the onion. And there are multiple layers of control that exceed their authority that are below them. If you don't think you have a one world government, you've had it for a long time.
But
Well,
you would agree that our politicians don't actually run the country.
No, that's correct. They don't run the country. Look at the banking commission. When the bank wanted to remember, the Federal Reserve is not a governmental body. Originally in the 1920s, or the 1920s, the banking system had a completely different name. They lobbied Congress to get the name federal on there because they want people to believe it's part of the government. You as a taxpayer in this country are mandated by the government to cover the losses of the Federal Reserve and the banking system out of your tax-paying dollar.
Okay, I'm sorry to distract us a little bit.
Yeah.
Get back in our lane here.
Yeah.
So I came in a little late, and I thought I heard you say that abduction is impossible. Is that right?
No, I didn't say impossible. I said aliens are not responsible for abductions. That's an entirely different thing.
Okay, so then my question would be, listening to Art Bell and George Norrie.
I've been on all those shows.
Because they have stories that seem very
But remember,
convincing.
they're just reporters. So what are they doing? They are the conduit upon which the guest is passing their information. You don't see that Art Bell and George Norrie and Regina Meredith, whom I've done several very good interviews with. You don't see them sitting there and promoting that on their own. They are basically the conduit for the guest to speak through it. And I've listened to having been on these shows, I've listened to a number of them too, and sometimes I just have to shake my head. And just because so-and-so says it's true, you better go look for yourself to determine what has some validity to it and what doesn't.
Just to be clear, I haven't listened to that show in years.
The last time I was with George Norrie. I was in Colorado at the Gaia studio when we filmed an episode for this show called Beyond Belief. And you'll find that on the internet if you wish. I'm on YouTube. I have my own programs on YouTube, and then there are many other programs that I've done for other people as well that they have put on their particular YouTube channels. And so I said to him before we started the program, why would you call it beyond belief? Because obviously we're doing the program for a reason. If we truly believed there was no validity to it, why would we waste our time? And I personally have found George to be rather neutral on everything. I think he is more of a media personality, right? And he charges $5,000 an appearance, so he gets a pretty good kickback. And you know, whether it's George Norrie, Art Bell, of course, is now long gone, but there are a number of these programs. Night Dreams Talk Radio, Gary Anderson, I will be on, I think, in 2 weeks. And God, there's Midnight in the Desert, and there's a whole bunch of them. But they are basically venues for anybody to, you know, they're running a radio show. For them, they got to have somebody on the show. It doesn't make any difference who it is. And otherwise, they got no listeners and no sponsors. And so consequently, you know, you get the full shebang of what is being thrown out there. And
I got one more thing to bring up, which brings us back in focus here. So personally, you know, I get up every morning, I play a couple games of solitaire, and then I go, you know, looking through Facebook. Today I get something on Facebook about the moon. I don't know if that's because you're here or whatever, but I had my interest. I was looking through it, and it's believed that the moon actually has a metal core.
Yes, it has gravity, it has to.
And the moon's a satellite. It's actually not even supposed to be here. But,
well, that I don't know. I'm not God.
but all the craters are the same depth.
Well, there's a couple of things there about the moon that's interesting. Yeah, and there's been a summation that a large amount of crater impact happened at a particular time in history uniformly. So they had a plethora of impacts at one time, and then at different spans of time. And so, of course, the moon revolves around its axis around the Earth. So the moon does revolve, even though it's fixed in position to the Earth. As the Earth moves, that continual 360 motion means that the moon revolves.
You see the same face all the time.
Yes, that's true. But how many people know that the backside of the moon, what we call erroneously the dark side, the backside of the moon is lit 14 days out of the month. And it's dark 14 days out of the month. Everybody thinks, because we have so many misnomers of what we accept versus what the reality is.
Well, this article went on to elaborate that, you know, when the Eagle took off, they have sensors on it and it vibrated for like an hour, trying to, you know, establish that there's actually a metal shell underneath.
I also have heard that by examining the film, and I don't know that whether this is true or not, one would have to look at it differently. When the LEM came down and landed, of course it used retro engines in order to slow down to its landing. And in fact, astronaut Armstrong had to manually take over the last portion of the landing in order to successfully touch that down with 20% of the fuel. Interestingly, without going too far of a tangent, since the Israeli and another probe both crashed into the moon, I think it's because they weren't aware of the greater gravitational flux and pull, and so that means that they miscalculated the retro fuel necessary to significantly slow that craft down to a soft landing. While some governments have it, others do not. But going back to the crater impact, some of the craters are uniform. Some of them, as you see in the book, are terraced, just like you would find the mining that was conducted in the Southwest. I've flown over them many times. You look down at the circling terrace of the strip mining. They're exactly the same. There are areas where you can see on the lunar pictures where out of a smaller crater an entire volume of material is shifting like you're pouring milk out of a pitcher into a cup all shifting into the larger crater below. There is mining activity going on the moon, not only ours, but theirs. And Colonel Curso, who wrote the book the day after Roswell, also talked about the fact that we had a secret space program. And that space program was initiated in 1957 called Project Rainbow. And that was to put a facility on the moon and be permanently manned by revolving personnel of 20 before 1967 was complete. And they completed the project. And the Apollo astronauts, especially Neil Armstrong, you noticed he was an entirely changed man when he came back from that space flight. And it's because he found out that they were not the first step on the moon, because when they walked around, they saw not only spaceships, in which you can see the one hanging on over the astronaut as the other one takes the picture. It's on the back cover of the moon base book that we put out in '81, and that came directly from the NASA archives.
I caught some of that in that article
yeah,
I just wanted.
And then they went and walked to the edge of the crater, and they saw their own people, because Project Rainbow was complete. And we've had a military presence on the moon ever since the mid-60s, 66. And so these high commissioned officers are part of a public space program, and they were not told the truth of what's going on. And boy, you can imagine the disillusion that they experienced by finding out, they literally bust their behind. They go through months and months of intense training, and then they strap themselves to basically is a controlled bomb. Because the explosive force is nothing more than all at once it's measured and coming out consistently out of the bottom of a Saturn V. And so, and as we know, astronauts have lost their lives in the shuttle and other circumstances. And so that is the price you pay with exploration, But purposeful negligence, there I can't find any reason for that. And both Apollo 1 burning on the pad and the space shuttle was because of negligence. Our willingness to put the safety of the crews against the cost of the dollar.
It was a rush, and anything mechanical is meant to fail.
Well, yeah, exactly. And
So,
Apollo 1, the one that burned on the pad, Gus Grissom complained to Gordon Cooper, and Cooper put that in his book, A Leap of Faith. And Gordon Cooper, talked like crazy about extraterrestrials. He went on the air. Not only did he see them as a squadron commander in Europe in the 50s, but he saw them in space. He went on the air with Griffin, and the quotes we have exactly. And he says, yes, I've encountered these human beings from other worlds, and they are like us, basically like us. He was very clear on the subject. And so Gus Grissom complained to Cooper that this was being pushed too fast, because they wanted to satiate Lyndon Johnson, who wanted to be a de facto Kennedy, and he was never anything near.
Gotcha.
So they pushed the process ahead of schedule, ahead of oversight, and the poor fellows burned to death in some of it. And with the space shuttle, that they had leakage problems on the SRB, the solid rocket boosters, that ignited, and they knew damn well that there was a fatigue factor involved. So it's dice, it's Russian roulette. Let's throw the dice.
That's exactly right.
But still, given the chance, I would do it. Personally, I would go. I figure, well, gotta go sometime. Maybe the experience is better than the consequences.
I'd rather go to space than go down to the Titanic.
Oh, yeah. Especially in a piece of fiberglass.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So, anyway, let's take some quick questions, and I'll let these other gentlemen have at it. Yes, sir.
How do you feel about these companies like SpaceX, like privatizing that sort of travel?
I think it's good.
Okay.
The privatizing of space, space travel or space support, because now, as you know, we of course have no more shuttle. The shuttle is 40 years old technology, and we'd rather spend billions on Ukraine and the Middle East or whatever conflict we can find ourselves to get into, without any compunction about spending it for better reasons. And the economic return on space technology is 4 to 1, which is better than any stock market stock you can basically get on. And this is a statement by Hugh Downs, not my own, because I'm not an economist. But what happens is that opens up the avenue to greater exposure. And the greater the exposure, the more likelihood that more and more people will talk. But in reality, what people aren't aware of is that many of the astronauts talked. Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, Ed White, who was it? Gemini 4, the 2 astronauts took pictures up there, and they're even published in the magazine of the craft flying alongside, multicolored like the one that was photographed in China a few years ago. And if you look at the publication, it's called Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space. This was a book that was published in the late 70s, early 80s by a fellow by the name of Maurice Chatelain. You can find it in paperback if you go on the used book outlets in the internet. And in there, he is the patent holder for all the telecommunications for NASA. He was hired and specifically chartered to develop all that instrumentation and all those facilities for allowing Apollo to communicate. And he lists categorically every single space shot was accompanied, and this is exact words, by extraterrestrial spacecraft. Every one of them. And then he lists them and what they saw. And when you read that all of that exposure, of course some talked. But some of them, of course, obeyed their military mandate and remained silent. And we have to respect that. That is their choice. And remember, there are consequences for talking. And some people think, well, you know, the general public is not really very, shall we say, supportive or sympathetic, because when somebody comes out and makes a statement, the first inclination is everybody is to attack and tear them down, right? And these people risk their professions, their colleagues, their own associations, and their friends and their family do too. And so some of them say, well, I don't want to take the brunt of all of that. You know, if the other ones want to, then they did it. I don't need to do it too. So we have to respect what people feel they can, how they can help, and how they may not help. And so yes, space, the more we go into space, the better we become. Because if we want to call it the final frontier, as it comes, the overcoming the difficulties of being in space requires a collaborative, unified action. You no longer, if you're in the ISO, the International Space Station, and you're Russian or you're Chinese or you're American or whatever, the countries and nationalities cease to exist. You are combinedly working together for your own safety, survival, and continuation. And that's how we should be. But we're not doing that on this planet. We're doing exactly the opposite. The more we go to space, the more that happens. And not only that, then comes the exposure of what is discovered out there. And I think to some degree, we have decided to step back and let commercial space grow, because it still will take 20, 30, 50 years, and allow whatever revelations to come from that to do so, This way, the official agencies don't have to jeopardize their reputations and careers and all of that. Not only that, you've wiped through a generation or two that is, that has been predisposed to a particular type of thinking, and given them a chance to contribute and to support something of a little bit more value. So yes.
Where is the base of these flying objects? Where are they coming from and go?
Okay. We met with former Soviet Russian scientists in 1989, and we had a private meeting with them in Germany where we were having a conference. And they said that they have used decommissioned air bases as welcoming platforms for these craft and their occupants to land. And that we welcome them with open arms